Welcome everybody, I'm Jeremy John, and I want to take you into the fascinating world of tour guiding. Every day in London, you'll find eccentric personalities guiding people in the footsteps of history. Some show historic architecture to overseas visitors, while others bring history to life for school groups. All the best tour guides have one thing in common. They know how to tell a good story. And that's why I started this podcast, to capture the stories of these tour guides. You will find out what drew them to this profession. You will discover which sites they love the most. And you will hear the secret methods they use to make history come alive. Today I have two guides on the show. I also have, for the first time on this podcast, a baby, not just any random baby. It's actually the baby of one of our guides. We have Bex Couper. Hello, Bex.
Hello, it's not my baby.
And we also have Rachel Cole-Wilkin.
Hello, it is my baby.
And what's the name of your baby, Rachel?
This is Rosemary.
And how old is Rosemary?
She is 3 weeks and 1 day.
Fantastic. Now, just in case listeners are wondering if this is a wonder baby who's become the world's youngest tour guide, she is here because, well, because why not, I think is why she's here. But she will not be giving commentary on guiding, I believe.
She may give some commentary, but
she
nobody
may
knows
give.
what's it about. What it's about.
I was always taught never to overpromise and underdeliver in life. So now the pressure's no longer on us. The pressure's on the baby to perform here. I would like to start by asking our guests which tours they give. So, Rachel, over to you.
So when I'm not on maternity leave, I do quite a few things. I run London Loo Tours, which is a walking tour all about public toilets and their history and politics and stories around that. I do change of the guards quite a bit, showing people around the ceremony. My real passion is hidden London, secret London, kind of unusual things. But I also do much more kind of mainstream commercial stuff, like excursions to Warner Brothers studios in Oxford and Stonehenge, and the occasional Harry Potter walking tour, ghosts and pubs, and pretty much anything people will pay me to talk about.
Lovely stuff. And what about you, Bex?
Well, like Rachel, I will pretty much do any tour that's going. I just love touring. But in particular, I do Royal London, hidden streets of London, especially Clerkenwell. The architecture there is really amazing. Changing of the guards, all the regulars. But my absolute favourite is the pioneering women of the City of London. I think partly because their story really is so untold. There's some really interesting figures out there, people who really contributed to the history of the city that I think just need explaining and celebrating.
Marvellous. Well, listeners will see why I've got both these guides on, because both of them do a whole host of tours and both of them have been doing this for a little while. So we're going to be getting into their backstories now. I'm going to start with you, Rachel. Rachel is currently gently caressing her baby, and I'm sure the baby is very happy about that. And hopefully your explanation will also be like a lullaby for this baby to stay calm. But let's see. So Rachel, please can you tell us, how did you end up a tour guide?
So I came to it sort of by accident. I am originally from California, and in 2011 I moved to London for drama school to do my master's degree and finished that in 2012 and got on a graduate entrepreneur visa where I basically could stay in the country if I started up my own business. And I hadn't intended to be a tour guide, but I found this website where you sort of pitch tours and you sell them and they take commission. And my original plan was to do a Shakespeare tour because that was what I was passionate about. But I also had this little obsession with where you could go to the public toilets for free in London. And I happened to mention that in my entrance interview at this platform. And the guy I was talking to said, "Oh, you should do a tour about that. That would be really interesting." And I kind of thought, how would that work? Like, we'll have to drink a lot and then go pee a lot. But I started researching and I found out there's actually quite a lot to know about toilets. So Loo Tours was my first proper tour. I abandoned Shakespeare completely for toilets. And actually...
Sorry, just say that sentence again. I abandoned Shakespeare for toilets.
I abandoned Shakespeare completely for toilets. I've actually never done a Shakespeare tour to this day. And I wrote the Loo Tour, and it took a while, but it took off. And actually, for my first couple of years of tour guiding, Loo Tours was all I did. And I did a lot of other toilet-related stuff. I did interviews and I did kids' workshops. So I was less a tour guide and more a toilet expert who happened to do tours. And then my visa ran out, and I moved back to California for a couple of years. And then I married my English husband and moved back to England. And that was the point when I sort of went, Loo Tours is fun. I'd like to do more of this. So it was 2017 that I sort of moved into guiding more broadly. And from there, it's just been this wonderful process of, making connections to people and meeting people and getting to go all sorts of exciting places and learn cool things.
Marvellous. Well, definitely the first guest that not only brought a baby, but also brought stories of how toilets got them into tour guiding. So full points for originality. Now, over to Bex. And Bex already listed a whole wide spectrum of tours that she does, but we have no idea how Bex got into tour guiding. So it won't start with toilets, I'm guessing. In fact, I've got no idea how it does start. So Bex, please enlighten us.
So I don't think I could beat Loo Tours, and mine is quite recent. During the pandemic, we all had to go and do our sort of daily walk. And I remember looking at this rather amazing Gothic fancy water fountain in my local park and just staring at it as you do sort of in a haphazard way, and then looking at it and thinking, why has Angela Burdett-Coutts given a local park an enormous fountain? And when I say it's enormous, it's almost like if you've ever seen the monument to Albertopolis in Hyde Park, it's like a smaller version of this in dark granite, but it's really fancy. And I was looking at it thinking, but that must have cost a lot. And you know what it's like. You go home, you're researching it, and then you're buying a book, and then you're reading that book. And before you know it, you've logged on to a course in local history. And then halfway through that course, you're going, this is really good. Oh, I'm going to go on a local guiding course. And that's how I got into it. I just took my fascination, my curiosity about somebody who'd piqued my interest. And just suddenly, before I knew it, I'm a guide. And the research is really fun, isn't it? I mean, you can go and do Changing of the Guard. It's great. It's lovely. But doing your own research, coming up with your own ideas, putting it together and making it an interesting tour, I don't think there's anything better.
A big thrust of this podcast is to interrogate the craft of tour guiding, but specifically with both of these guests, I want to go into more detail about their tours because I think what makes them very interesting is they've both come up with their own ideas and unique paths to take visitors and schools and all kinds of people to learn more about this city in a fun and engaging way. So I want to ask first Rachel. Rachel, what do you think makes a really good tour? Because I've been on your Loo Tour and I'm biased here, but I absolutely loved it. What was it that you realized would work on something like that?
I think for me, one of the things that is true across all my tours that I feel are really good is they hopefully help people to connect ideas in ways they might not have otherwise done. So a lot of times you're talking about bits of history or things that they might already know, but you draw connections between stuff and sort of dig a bit deeper and go, oh, this is why this happened, or this is why something is the way it is. And I think tour guiding is a really good medium for that because it's also site-specific. So oftentimes it's a story that's linked to a place. And maybe they know the story if they've walked across the place, but they've never thought about them in relation to each other. I'm going to give an example that's not about toilets, actually, but one of my bits on a tour I'm really proud of. On a hidden London tour I do for Fun London Tours, we go down an alleyway where we talk about the history of the printing press. And then we see a remnant of Whitefriars Abbey, this church, and I talk about Henry VIII and specifically how the existence of the printing press led to his being able to get his first divorce, because you have this time of, religious dissent that never would have happened without the printing press. It's kind of like the internet of its day, and it's spreading all these new and radical ideas that people hadn't been able to read for themselves before. And so I get a lot of guests who they know their Tudor history. They probably know half of what I told them about the press, but they've never necessarily put that together and gone, oh, if the press hadn't been around, this bit of English history would have been very different. Henry would have been the man with one wife and not pissed off the Pope. So it's just drawing those connections and kind of making sure people understand the significance of the stories you're telling.
Wonderful. So when you say the significance of them, tell me how you explain elements of history like that to someone, whether it's school children or someone who's from another country who's come over to visit London, is maybe less aware of this part of history. How do you break it down in a way that's easy to digest?
Oh, that's a great question. I think you kind of have to figure out the essence, like what's the bare minimum that somebody who doesn't know this story needs to know. So I do try to make sure, sometimes I get this right, sometimes I get it wrong, but make sure that I include, it's kind of the history 101 in the tour, but in such a way that the people who are there who already know the history aren't going to get bored because I'm talking about it for 3 hours. Thinking about one time I got it wrong, there's another bit on the hidden tour where I referenced the Blitz kind of 3 times running. And most of the guests on that tour, they know what the Blitz is. They know their World War II history. But there was one where I think we got to the 3rd stop of me talking about the Blitz, and a teenager on the tour went, "What's the Blitz?" And I go, okay, we need to dial this back now and actually explain the context.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, is just about being aware of your audiences and the fact that you may have different audiences from one tour to the next who will come at it with different starting points. But I think as a tour guide, you do need to try and consistently get the basics of, this is this nugget of history that you need to know in there.
I'm wondering with your Loo Tours, if also there's something where you've got themes which are universal. May sound a bit crude to say this, but it's just a fact that everyone needs to go to the loo at some point. Wherever you're from, whatever age you are, whatever you think, whatever football club you support, you need to go to the loo. So do you think the success of that tour has also stemmed from the fact that we can all comprehend the theme?
I think it is, because as you say, it is universal. Like everybody from every country in the world poops and pees and needs somewhere to do that. So yeah, there is that kind of universality with that subject that I think works out really nicely. But it's also something that we don't tend to think about. One of the things I talk about sometimes on the tour is you learn when you're quite young. So you're maybe 2.5, 3 years old, your parents show you the basics of how to go to the toilet and they help you with it for a while. But then as soon as you've got the hang of it, they breathe a sigh of relief, they close the door, and we never talk about it again. So it's this thing we all do, but we don't kind of think about the habits that we develop that actually we take for granted our toilet habits, and we usually assume everyone else does it the way we do it. But actually, there's wildly different ways of using the toilet. And one of the things that we sometimes do on tours where people are more open to sharing, which some guests are and some aren't, is I get people talking about things like, do you crumple your toilet paper or do you fold your toilet paper? Do you go around the front or around the back to wipe? Do you stand up or sit down? And it's just mind-blowing that anybody does anything apart from what you do. And it's maybe not like life-changing or that important, or maybe it is life-changing if you find out you can fold your toilet paper a different way. I've completely forgotten what the original question was because I just like talking about toilets.
Well, the universality of
Yes.
the theme, whereas,
Yeah.
niche bits of history from the Middle Ages that, if you're
Yeah.
a medieval expert, fine. But when you've got a theme that anyone can understand, I think my point is that might help craft a tour that people can enjoy and get something out of.
Yeah, and certainly a tour that people engage with, because, sometimes people come on a history tour and maybe they know about that bit of history, maybe they don't. But Loo Tours, it's very personal for everybody in some way, because it's something that they're, a process that they're automatically involved in.
Fantastic. Just one final question on these Loo Tours, because you mentioned about how people maybe fold paper differently and these kind of things. I don't know why it is, but for some reason, especially when the Queen was still with us, that people always speculated that she did it differently, or the royal family have different methods or different facilities.
It's toilet gossip fascinates me. There was this rumor for a long time. This is back when the Queen was still around, so we're talking Prince Charles now, the artist formerly known as Prince Charles. I never know what to call him. But there's this rumor that Prince Charles liked to travel with a white leather toilet seat, and he would have that installed in situ wherever he went. And he was asked about it on a radio program. I think he was in Australia. And his response live on air was, "Don't believe that crap." So according to Charles, he doesn't take his white leather toilet seat everywhere. But because I like to go down rabbit holes, I did some digging and I did find a white leather toilet seat manufacturer that had the Prince of Wales's royal warrant from Charles. So he definitely has some of them. Maybe he doesn't travel everywhere with it, but he definitely has some white leather toilet seats.
Wow. Is this almost like when a thief gets caught with the loot and the police are sort of like, well, you've got the loot. We saw you coming out of the building.
Oh, I've not had the chance to ask him personally about it. We do know he takes pride in toilets. It's partly because Sandringham got a special mention in the Loo of the Year awards this year, which is a real thing. And according to the articles, it was partly at the King's behest that they entered into the Loo of the Year awards. So there is, a level of pride there in providing good facilities for visitors.
Wonderful. I suppose going back to universality, although we all have our own habits, the idea of having luxury facilities, I think we'd all like to have that. And just last thing to mention on this Loo Tour is those that have no facilities, because I've been on the tour and one thing that moved me a lot was when you went into those aspects and reminded us of really even just having basic facilities for some people is a luxury in itself. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So the statistic that the World Health Organization has put out at the moment is around half the world's population don't have access to safely managed sanitation. And that's not that they necessarily don't have a toilet. Some people don't even have that. But that even if they do have a toilet, it's not managed in a way that's kind of hygienic and that leads to good health. And that's one of the biggest global health crises there is, actually. And that's something that I mention on almost all my Loo Tours. And I think one thing I like about the Loo Tours, you can start with something that feels a little bit silly and a little bit taboo. So I always start with fun stories. And then partway through the tour, I'll bring in the sort of grittier stuff, the more serious stuff, and then bring it back to lightness at the end. And I think that gets people remembering it and thinking about it in a way that they wouldn't necessarily if I were just standing there on a street corner handing out brochures saying, "Oh, did you know that poor sanitation is a leading cause of infant mortality in third world countries?" So it's because it engages people with the subject. And then maybe some of them will never do anything with that info, but some of them will go dig a bit deeper or donate to a charity or get involved in some way. So that's one thing to me that's really important about the Loo Tour is that it's more than just a few toilet jokes. It actually gets people thinking about something that's a really important invention and really important globally for health.
That's wonderful. And I really like that technique that you've used to start jolly, get people hooked at the start. I think all tour guides would agree that's the most pivotal part of any tour is to get people at the beginning. Then get the serious stuff in. But then also, I think all tour guides would agree as well, you want to leave people with a bit of a smile on their face going on to the next place. So what a lovely technique and a way to sort of get that information through. And now, no doubt it's why this Loo Tour has been a great success for many years, and I'm sure for many years to come. And I think touching on serious topics is also something which Bex does as well. So I want to hear your techniques that you use, Bex, and also just more generally, how do you tackle the themes which you tackle, but also create a tour which, for want of a better word, is fun and enjoyable and a good day out?
I think Rachel said something really important there about involving people as much as possible. One of the things I did with Pioneering Women was get people to give me a scale of whether they thought of a 1 to 10 and what they thought was pioneering about my characters. One of the ones I introduced, and this is curiosity again, I had been taught about the women who had been involved in the South Sea bubble, and I wanted to know those who'd invested, who'd made money, and those who'd lost it. And this is a bit about your own research rabbit hole, isn't it? So I'd come across this wonderful character called Lady Mary Wortley Montague, who was fascinating because she had invested in the South Sea bubble. She had been blackmailed by a French lover, and then Alexander Pope had really ripped her to shreds for this. But not only had she done that, she's incredible because she'd also somehow been out to Istanbul and had spotted that women in the harem there were using a different type of inoculation to protect them from smallpox. So she brought back that skill to London and persuaded people to do what she'd seen, this technique called engraftment. It was hugely risky. She persuaded Queen Caroline, married to George II, to do it, and is credited with protecting Queen Caroline's children. And so she's really skilled, but you can't tell that all in one go. You have to pace it in a different way to make people engage with you. So when you're designing a tour, I get very overexcited by my research. And I would say the combination is finding the right location. I've split her story up. I tell the financial one right by Jonathan's coffee shop in the alleyway in the city. So it's exciting. Most people haven't found it. They couldn't find it by themselves. And then throughout the trail, I bring them back, and my last one, we're outside the apothecaries, and then I introduce her along with other women who've been involved in medicine. And by that time, you say to them things like, do you remember the woman I talked to you about? And then when you've introduced about what she managed to do and how risky it was, because actually, again, the newspaper articles really condemned her for this. She didn't get much credibility for what she did. She had to write back and justify what she was doing under a pseudonym. And actually, who does remember Lady Mary Wortley Montagu? Not for anything around smallpox, but they do remember Jenner, Edward Jenner, because he's the man who went on to find the inoculation for smallpox. But she was one of the first to do it and to risk her status and her husband's status in the first place. So I find that story really engaging. But trying to tell it in a way, you're right. You have to get down to an essence and you have to distill it for people so that they want to know more. And the location always helps. Finding something really pretty that they wouldn't find by themselves is a real, I think, a selling point.
Can you tell us a bit more about locations that you choose that you find work really well to get the story across?
So I absolutely love the city's alleyways because, I think if it's anything that people wouldn't go down by themselves, especially if they're overseas tourists, take them down it. Tell them that there's nothing to be frightened of. And especially the ones, if you come from Leadenhall Market, which is rather spectacular in itself because it's beautiful and Victorian and Harry Potter's filmed there. But you cross over the road, you go down a few darkened alleyways, and then you end up right by a church, which does look a bit Dickensian, actually. And actually, 9 times out of 10, most people aren't going to find it themselves. But then there's a labyrinth of those old alleyways where the coffee shops sprung up in the 1600s. And those coffee shops are a little bit like our first penny universities, they were called, but it's also where the financial part of the city arose. So being able to weave in history, being able to show them a little bit of places that they wouldn't find by themselves that are really interesting, I think is a must. Because otherwise it's a bit dull, isn't it? It's a bit samey. They can go on a tour bus and see all these big sites, but you use the word street historian, well, you as a guide, you can show them things that they wouldn't find by themselves that are pictorially really interesting. And my other one, again, I think is an absolute beauty. It's just down the back streets of Blackfriars by the apothecaries. It's absolutely stunning. It gives you a sense of historical cobble street on the side of a hill. You're looking at the brickwork. You're looking at the old gas lamps. And you're going, yeah, this is pretty great, actually.
Listening to you describe this, Bex, I'm feeling emotions just hearing it. And I'm wondering if a lot of what we're doing is getting people thinking, but I think that feeling is a big thing. And I think what you're describing, it's the reason why watching videos will never quite replace being at the place, because you feel something. The way you transmitted that to me, just describing the Apothecaries Hall and so on. But can you maybe talk a bit more about that? What are you trying to get people to feel when they're down those areas?
I do want them to feel that London is more than just the big hitters, that there are layers of history. We know that London, especially the city, has got a whole Roman city 20 feet beneath our feet. And I still think that's really cool. So I try and get them to see it, sense it, pointing out the height of some of our cemeteries. That's a good point, because when you show them, for instance, if you've been to St Dunstan's in the east and you know it's on the side of the hill, you show them the height of that cemetery. You don't sugarcoat that. That's the height of the bodies. I mean, it's one of the best things you get to say, isn't it, when you're at Charterhouse going, you're standing on a plague pit. the best line I think you ever get to deliver there, because it's true. So, something that's sensory. I mean, here's another example. I think this happens in all tours. There's beautiful areas, and then you have a bit of a dead area. And there's a dead area, I have to say, I have along Cheapside, because I'm talking about women's history. But I noticed in my own research that there were 3 women from the same family who had fan shops. And so what I do now is bring a fan out with them, and I get women to show me how to speak fan language, because there's a whole guide of, if you put a fan on one side, it means come and look at me. If you fan yourself discreetly in another way, it means my husband's coming really quickly. If you drop it, it's who's that? And that's fun. You make it engaging, but that's trying to give somebody a sensory experience that's engaging, but also gets you through a bit of a dead spot, and hopefully gets them thinking that they're back in, 18th century London.
Wonderful. So a bit of time travel as well. I think this is probably a good segue to talk about working with children as well, because you mentioned the sensory nature of tours and you've talked about plague pits. I think you very quickly get kids' attentions when you mention you're above a plague pit. And certainly I think maybe not with the fans, but certainly giving something out or something where they can get involved. Can you talk a bit more about these tours in the context of younger people that have come on your tours and what you found works with them?
I'm laughing because this happened by mistake. I have to say, it was one of actually my changing of the guards when I had, and we've all been there, when the guards didn't turn up on time and you're outside St James's Palace and it's going on and on and on, and you've got a 7-year-old looking like he'd rather be somewhere else. And I dug back down into my rucksack and pulled out the ruler with all the kings and queens on it and said, "Can you find me Henry VIII?" And that was good fun, because immediately he's engaged. And then we had a bit of a game of, go on, give me another king or queen and I'll do what I can do to tell you. I mean, it was a good test for me, for my my monarchical royal history. But that's sort of, you have to engage them some way, don't you? You have to get them involved. They can't just sit there taking it all in for ages. So that was a lesson of how to always carry something that's going to work, be it your flagpole, if you've got your flagpole, or be it a ruler with those darn kings and queens on. But they have really helped me in times of need, I have to say.
Just the flagpole to which Bex is referring to here is often tour guides for certain tours, especially with a bigger group, will have an extended flag, which helps bigger groups not lose them. But also, I think you're mentioning a great technique with kids, which I think you're alluding to, is get the kid to carry the flag. Is that what you were suggesting?
Absolutely. I have had sibling rows on it, though. He's carried the flag for way too long. All right, you can have it up to the Duke of York and then it's hers, okay? No arguments, all right? And then you're looking at the parents going, am I going to step in or are you going to step in? And, I mean, that is a little bit tricky. But yeah, you do have to engage them. And also, quite honestly, at the beginning, it's so busy that you want somebody to have a flagpole just so you can do the rest of the checking in. So it's sort of, being practical and engaging and hopefully fun.
Wonderful. Rachel, can you talk a bit more to me about working with children?
Yes, I mean, to be honest, I was thinking since you asked, I don't think I guide much differently with children than I do with adults, in that I just treat everybody as though they are a enthusiastic but possibly also needing some encouragement child, and I will get adults carrying the flagpole and involved. But there is something really wonderful about having kids on your tour when they're really engaged. I think especially on Change of the Guards, I've had some tours where I'll have a kid or two who basically becomes my co-presenter because, they know so much, they have so many questions. And that's just one of the most satisfying things, I think, is having kids who are really interested and involved.
We've talked a lot about tours going well. I think it is that time in the podcast to brace the topic of tours that haven't quite gone to plan. And when you are a street historian, when you are on the streets, well, anything can happen. It's not a controlled environment, and plans can go out the window quite easily. Can you both just tell me about some of the times when things have not particularly gone to plan? Bex, I'm going to ask you to start, please.
Oh, gosh, I think I've actually got rid of most of them. Actually, no, there was one last year when 6 people turned up for a tour, and it was just chucking it down. You know, one of those British days where it was sunny in the morning, 10 minutes before the tour, you can't see across the street. I was an absolute drowned rat, and I was slightly praying that they wouldn't want to come on the tour, but they were such a bunch of enthusiasts that they all turned up, and it was me just looking. I was the one without the umbrella. They had brought their umbrella. So always make sure you've got your umbrella in your pack-a-mac. You need that, don't you, as a tour guide? Things that you never knew you needed. But they were absolutely delighted that I was going to still run this tour. So I just looked stupid. But it did go to plan, and they were lovely. They were absolutely amazing. And again, it goes back to, so it's not really anything going wrong. It's just that I wasn't prepared. They were. They wanted to carry on. They didn't care that it was absolutely chucking it down. And they carried on for an hour and a half through the pouring rain with me. And they were the most delightful bunch I've ever had. It was almost a bit like Blitz Spirit, you know?
Rachel?
I have so many stories to choose from, but because you told a rain one, I'm going to tell a rain one as well. That I was doing a Loo Tour once, and I had just 3 guests, I think, that day. There was a woman traveling solo, and there was a couple. And we're partway through the Loo Tour, and it starts chucking it down. And I was in Embankment Gardens at that point, where there's a fairly long stretch with no buildings, no shelter. But I said to them, you know, look, I know it's really, really wet. We're going to walk through this garden, and then we're going to take shelter in a pub. We'll talk about toilets from there, and we can decide about what we want to do. So we start walking through the garden. I'm chatting with this woman who's on her own, and we realize this other couple aren't with us. And we look back, and they're standing under a tree a little ways back, still getting drenched because it's pouring. And so we went back, and we think, hey, the pub's just 5 minutes walk away. Do you want to keep going? They would not come out from under that tree. So we stood there and we chatted for about 5 minutes. And eventually, I think the rain let up a little bit. We enticed them out, and we start walking along again and chatting. And I get chatting to the woman traveling solo again. And then we realize this couple still aren't with us. And we look back, and they're under another tree, just, you know, standing there getting drenched. And there came a point where we had to give up. And that's, I think, the only time I have had to purposely leave guests behind on a walking tour, because they just could not be convinced to come out from under that tree to a pub that was 2 minutes away around the corner. I have an animal story as well that I was thinking about, because Emily was telling animal stories about how, you know, they say never do an act with an animal. This was actually one of the last tours I did before I went on maternity leave. I was in St. Paul's Church in Covent Garden, which is not the same as St. Paul's Cathedral. And I can't remember what I was talking about, but this little church mouse skitters around, and it skitters under my feet, and all the guests are sort of going, oh, and it skitters away, and I start my story again. And then about 15 seconds later, a magpie swooped down, grabbed the mouse, but it didn't just fly away with it. It proceeded to hop around the garden and drop the mouse and pick up the mouse, and then eventually flew up into a tree and ate it. And I was just like, I cannot top this on the rest of the tour. That's going to be the most memorable thing that happens today. Oh. And then I still had to do that the last 45 minutes of the tour.
How long did that go on for? Because when these moments happen, we often just have to stop talking and roll with it. But
yeah,
how long was this magpie playing with the mouse?
It felt like ages. It was probably a couple of minutes. It did go on quite a while. Yeah, it was definitely the most memorable thing that's probably ever happened to those guests, and possibly to me on a tour.
So I was going to say, that's a real murder happening in front of you.
It was, yeah.
Can I just reminded me of something? I don't know if you have all experienced this, but talking of animals, do you have that occasion when people say, and we want to go to the horse guards to see the soldier who's mucking around with the horses?
I've not had that.
I've had this a couple of times now, and I wonder whether there's some old YouTube footage going around where there was some sort of interaction of a horse being very badly behaved, and it's sort of gone a bit viral. And so some of our overseas guests think that if we take them down to horse guards, they're going to see this action happening. And I've been baffled a few times, and I thought, oh, I kind of got the gist of this now. It was an internet sensation, and they think it's going to happen every single time.
Yeah.
And you just feel as though you're letting them down because it doesn't happen.
This leads us, I suppose, onto the world we're in, because we are living in a world where there's so much access to information and videos circulating about London. I'm of the opinion that the greatest things in London are still the timeless things, rather than the latest gimmick or the latest thing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right in the sense that, like Bex mentioned earlier, it's these layers of history that make London amazing, rather than, what the trendy noodle place this week is, or the Legos that people will queue for 2 hours to look at for some reason. The internet is changing the way that tourists come around. Like we've seen this with Change of the Guards. When I started doing Change of the Guards tours back in, it must have been 2021 or 22, most of the spots we went to on our tours were kind of secret spots, and you could be pretty sure of getting a spot there as a tour guide if you showed up early enough. And now, because people are making TikToks and YouTubes and saying this is how you can do it yourself, you get to that spot and there's already 500 people there. And so we've had to adapt as tour guides because a lot of the secrets get out, and that's the world changing. That's fine. It's probably too big a topic to get deep into, but AI is also changing what people expect to see in London. Since I've been on maternity leave, I've been kind of scratching my tour guiding itch by going on London travel Facebook groups and things. And people use AI to make their itineraries, but they'll post things for feedback, and it'll be like, we're going to go see the changing of the guard in the morning, then we're going to go to the Cuddy Cirque in Greenwich, then to the Tower of London, and then to Harrods. And it's because of AI, it's because they put in prompts, and that's what it tells them.
For the listeners, just to be clear as to why that is amusing, shall we say, is because these are three places which are nowhere near each other. Often overseas visitors are unaware before arriving in London just how big the city is. By far the largest city in Western Europe, and also spread out historically. There isn't one historic centre of London. There are many different historical areas which take a while to get between them. And also we're not a city which was built for the car. So there's no fast way except for the tube, the underground system. But what Rachel's just listed are very disparate locations, which, yes, AI, well, they say it's getting better, though. Maybe it will get better at that. But do you think in some ways things have gone backwards? A bit of common sense has been lost?
I think it has. I think there's this idea that AI somehow knows better than the guidebooks and the people who've really crafted things. And that's what AI doesn't do. It doesn't craft it. It makes stuff up as well. There was one that somebody posted that referenced the changing of the lifeguard, and then it talked about beaches, because obviously AI had gone, lifeguards, beach. This is a connection. And for anyone not familiar, that's not what the changing of the lifeguard is. The lifeguard is the King's Lifeguard, which are the mounted sentries on horseback. There's nothing beachy or aquatic about them. But I'm just waiting for the time we get tourists asking to see the beach. We do have beaches in London, just not with lifeguards.
Do you know, I'm minded of the fact that if you are in Horse Guards Parade and you can ask people what it was used for in 2012, if they've got long enough memories, and test their memory, it was beach volleyball in the Olympics.
Go.
So there you go. That's what they're thinking. That's a lovely segue. But I want to circle back because you asked about the old things that just are timeless. And this sounds very nerdy, but one of the things that I love about Clerkenwell is just getting people to notice. Actually, a lot of London, just look up and notice and be curious about the things that you see. Even in Covent Garden, when you're walking around Neal's Yard or Neal Street, those old warehouses with the pulleys, just getting people to look up and notice. And that's why we love it, isn't it? You can't be on your phones too much. You're there in present time. AI isn't going to do it for you. It is about being there in the moment and experiencing it. My mum bought me a book called The Art of Noticing. Maybe she'd seen that I was on my phone too much, and this was a sort of intervention. And it isn't really anything else apart from just looking at what's around you, enjoying the senses of seeing what's written on the wall. I mean, you know, just your hood around here is incredible. There's a lovely sign on a street opposite that talks about the iron railings on the outside of a red brick purpose-built block of flats because they were encouraging people to have a little bit of window gardening. And it's incredible just getting yourself to spend the time and observe what's around you. We are head down on our phones or somewhere else, and just being present in our world is really good for you.
Rachel, Bex, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. So I'd like to say a big thank you to Rachel Cole-Wilkin.
Thank you so much for having me.
And a big thank you to Bex Couper.
Thank you. You need to mention Rosemary there as well.
Of course, we've left the star of the show, which is Rosemary, just 3 weeks and 1 day old. Thank you to my lovely guests and the extra bonus guest of Rosemary. And thank you to you, the listener, for listening through this. The next episode will be out next month, but until then, cheerio.